Right, folks, we'll kick off then. Morning to you all again.
Morning, Rosie.
Last session of the year. You've got a nice 3-week break after today's session. And there is just one more health and safety session immediately. We come back in January before you move on with construction technology. So well, I hope the health and safety one's been fairly straightforward for you, but for many of you on this group who are from a site background, hopefully you'll find the technology fairly close to home too, and that'll be handed over to my colleague Paul Andrews. This session this morning might be a slightly shorter session than normal. I'll just see how we go, but because what I'm basically doing, I am covering off 3 topics this morning, but they are 3 fairly brief topics. I will be 100% honest with you and say that these are topics that are less likely to be an assignment topic for you, but they are on the syllabus, and that therefore means that there could be a surprise. Just because there hasn't been one before doesn't mean there won't be one in the future. However, if there is going to be one, the one that I would say is most likely is that there would be a question on traffic management, because there has been a question on traffic management. There's never been a direct question on health and safety management systems. There's never been a question that is solely about welfare, site welfare. Of course, welfare you can bring in to other answers that you might talk a little bit about welfare. I mean, in November past, we had a question that touched on COVID, not surprisingly. And as many of you will know, you all had to look at your welfare facilities when it came to COVID. So you could have touched on elements of that. But I can't rule them out. But health safety management systems, welfare, highly unlikely. Traffic management has appeared, but it tends to suit more if our project scenarios like a city centre job. You'll all know you've got much more of a headache when you've got a town centre or city centre, and you're wondering how you're going to get deliveries in, and you're wondering where everybody's going to park and where you're going to put your compound and fabrication areas and things like that. This year's scenario, actually, it would be great if you did get a traffic question, because you've got loads of room. You've got a big old house and a big garden. You can have a personalised parking space for every person on the site if you wanted. You've got loads of room to play with. So we'll go through these this morning, and that will close off these 3 topics anyway. So we'll start with traffic management. If you think back to my first session on health and safety with you, I gave a bit of an overview about health and safety, and I directed you to some facts and figures and some information from the HSA website, and that would have included, the number of fatalities we have in Ireland in construction, and also, some of the accidents and what causes those accidents and so on. And hopefully you remember that the number one cause of fatalities in the construction industry is consistently working at height. But hopefully you also remember that number 2 consistently is struck by vehicles or struck by machinery. So if we're thinking, forget about the course for a minute, from a practical point of view, if there's a risk to you and your staff that something significant, something serious could happen to them, number 1, watch out when they're working at height. Number 2, think about what plant, machinery, traffic is on your sites, because that is the second most common way that people are killed on construction sites. Okay. So as I say, forget about the course for a minute. Just if you want the biggest impact for the least effort, those are 2 areas, heights and site transport, that you give consideration to. And then below the fatalities, of course, we have numerous accidents and incidents every year, whether they're near misses or whether they're injuries that cause people to be off work for a while. People have been struck by vehicles, and they're not fatalities. They mightn't make the headlines, but they are still serious accidents. And in most cases, if we look into them, we could find that we could have easily prevented them. In terms of what type of work is ongoing on site when these accidents happen. Bottom line is it can happen at any stage. You might think, oh, well, look, when we're doing excavations and groundworks and we've got maybe lots of excavators and dumpers and lorries drawn off site and things like that, that's when we're going to have it. And of course that is a risk. But again, the statistics show that it can happen at any stage in the site. Later on in the job, we have got maybe more people on site. So we've got more deliveries, we've got more vehicles. People are rushing about more in a hurry to get things finished and their minds are elsewhere. So it can occur at any stage within the project. Also, in terms of who it happens to, there's an interesting little bit of research I saw a couple of years ago about the trade or profession of people injured on construction sites. And what was surprising was just how many accidents happened to people in what they classified as technical and professional roles. In other words, managers, architects, consultants, not the guys getting their hands dirty and doing the work on the site. And that partly is down to a lack of awareness. We've got other things on our mind. You're nipping out of the site to go and talk to somebody. You're worrying about a problem that you have to solve and you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. So even on a very personal level, you have to, recognize that, at the same time, but a personal news here, my stepson and his partner are expecting their first child and she's in the labour ward as we speak. And I said, you see, later on, we'll drive him over to the hospital because his mind will be somewhere else. When you're distracted, you're not paying attention to things around you. Exactly the same on site. You're walking about thinking about other things. Another interesting link to that is unfamiliarity with the site. So research has shown that you're far more likely to be involved in an accident of any type within your first 24 hours of working on a new site. So that's where your inductions come into play as well, because people are unfamiliar with the site. You will have architects, clients coming to visit, people coming to measure up, people coming to do short duration tasks. They are equally as important to get this message across to as somebody who's going to be working for weeks and weeks on the site as well. So at your inductions, how you're going to manage site traffic and plant has got to be something that the message has got to be got across to people. And again, a lot of what you have already done in this course and what you will find next year as you continue, it's very much about your role in planning what's going to happen, okay? Not just reacting to things, not doing crisis management, not firefighting all the time, but what's happening not just today, next week, what's happening in 3 months' time, what's happening in 6 months' time in this site. The earlier you plan things, the easier it is to control them. So planning and controlling how you're going to do your traffic on site, how you're going to bring your deliveries in, where people are going to park, all that sort of stuff. The earlier that you sit down and decide that, the better. So it is an activity that causes deaths. It is an activity that causes serious injuries. What can we do about it? Well, the simplest, number one, easy thing to do is try and keep pedestrians and vehicles apart from each other. Segregation. Okay, so again, when we look into accidents and accident investigation, what we see is that a lot of it comes down to poor planning. If you recall a few sessions ago, I did a session with you on accident reporting. And I said that in accident investigation, you need to get right down into the root cause, not just well, you shouldn't have been there or you did something stupid. And again, with accidents involving pedestrians and vehicles, often as not, the blame comes down to poor planning, poor design. So that is something that is a management function that is something that all of you need to consider about. And I'm going to, as it's a smaller group, I'm thinking of, I know most of you now, I know what your backgrounds are, and I'm thinking, for example, Mike there, who's more office-based and involved in the QSing or the estimating side of things. So in those sort of scenarios, why is this relevant? Because there's no point sticking your head in the sand in terms of, well, what are we going to need here in terms of cost? Because a lot of the things that I'm going to show you next, they cost money. Okay, so there's no point denying that we're going to need certain things to try and keep the site safe. Now, show you some graphics and some photographs and things like that. Obviously, every site is different. The circumstances are different. The location is different. And let's be honest, the resources that you have available are different. And even those of you who travel around the country, you might see a difference from a city centre Dublin project that's high profile and lots of people walking past it and would be under the microscope from the HSA or whatever, or even just the client, to maybe a more rural location where, you know, to put it discreetly, you might get away with a little bit more. You know, we have to be honest and recognise that even within Ireland, there's different standards. There's different areas where you'll get away with more than others. But you have to have some budget. You have to have some resources put into all of health and safety. But there are some particular measures that we'll talk about now that, let's face it, they're going to cost money on the site. So if we're trying to keep people and vehicles apart, it's not going to be enough just to tell them, okay? Would you mind watching out for, don't run over anybody there, lads. Here, out. If you see a telehandler or anyone on the site, give it a wide berth. That is not going to be enough. You're going to have to provide, if the site allows it, some areas of segregation. And again, you know, a few bits of rebar and a bit of red and white tape is quite often not going to be enough just to provide that segregation. There's going to have to be some sort of fencing where you can do it. And even if we look at the graphic that I have up on the screen, there's always going to be areas where that intersects as well. And you can see already, we'll come back to this, but, you know, having good signage and things like that to make sure that everybody knows where the areas that are pedestrian only and areas where you're maybe going to have a mix. Now, the law isn't very prescriptive in terms of, you know, what sizes things should be and, you know, surfaces and so on. But most competent larger contractors will have their own rules about what we should have. Okay, so and there's a few other documents that I'll link you to that have popped on the Moodle for you as well as part of the resources for this. But this is one particular UK-based contractor. Okay, and you know, this is obviously a major project. There's a lot of workers on the site who have to get from different areas across it. There's also a lot going on in terms of site traffic and machinery. So in this case, they've got robust materials such as the timber box, such as you know, concrete barriers, or in some cases, you know, scaffold guardrails and like that provide a good solid physical barrier between where people are walking and vehicles. So even if somebody does lose control of a vehicle or you know, reverse without seeing, then at least there is some sort of protection before they come into it. Another key area is going to be the site entrance and exit. Now, be great if, you know, we had the budget and the space and the resources to do something like this, you know, with our barriers and our security office and so on, lots of signage and whatnot. And that's great if you've got a big site. But let's be honest, a lot of sites won't have that. There's one thing I could draw attention to there. It would be having the pedestrian entrance, okay? So even if you've got a basic site with a you know, a couple of gates where the vehicles go in and out, simply moving a few meters in either direction to have a pedestrian exit, that is a major point of risk if you have people coming and going from the site in the same gates that the lorries and vehicles are coming in and out. So you don't have to have something like we have on the screen there. Great if you have, but at the very least, do have good signage, good lighting. I'll talk about that a little bit later on as well, and also a separate pedestrian entrance and exit to the site. Now, building sites are, by their nature, they're temporary. All right, you are, you know, you're excavating, you're leveling, you're hardcoring, you're putting different finishes down. Things will change. You've got to dig, not just excavations, but you've got drainage to put in and so on. You've got to stockpile things. So you're very rarely going to have a nice level site all of the time. But you do need to give some considerations to, areas where there's going to be a lot of traffic, areas where there's going to be a lot of people, pedestrians walking back and forth. It's got to be as firm as possible. Okay, we've all been in the sites where you step out of the site office into the gutters, and you're stepping through stuff, around stuff, over stuff, and so on. On a good professional site, you will have firm, level, well-drained walkways that take as direct a route as possible to where you need to go. And again, just showing you some examples here. This is again a UK-based developer who have their own sort of guidelines. So if there's a walkway that's going to be in place for more than 8 weeks, they concrete it or they tar it, and make sure it's nice and even, and it's got a width of at least 1.2 meters. If it's going to be there for less than 8 weeks, they don't go to the expense of concreting or tarring it, but they use compact fill. Again, it's nice and even, and it's nice and level, and they give it that width of 1.2 meters. So, yeah, again, great if you have the resources, if you have the space, and so on to do that. But we have to recognise that on the larger projects, this is the type of investment that we're going to expect to see. And again, maybe in this one, it's not so much segregating some traffic, but you've got lots of storage areas. You've got potential for falls from height, as you can see on the right hand side. So there's different materials that we're using here, proprietary barriers and scaffolding with the mesh barriers as well. Especially when we're doing multi-story buildings, as you'll know, as the building rises, sometimes then particularly with tight sites and imprints, footprints, should I say, of the building, maybe taking up the entire space, we will need to utilize the floors, the constructed floors or basement areas or whatever, for what might be our normal site compound storage areas and even accommodation and so on. So sometimes, even though it's indoors, we need to recognize that we need to mark walk areas. In this case, it's got a matting system as well, and there is some sort of segregation from the work areas and the material storage areas. That photograph also demonstrates very well the lighting. There was an unfortunate fatality a number of years ago in Belfast, where they were renovating the old Ormo bakery into housing apartments, and the telehandler driver unfortunately struck somebody in the basement area while he was reversing. Poor lighting, poor segregation, and so on. Unfortunately, a lesson learned in the hardest possible way. So again, that's why I've emphasized 2 or 3 times about lighting as well. Our walkways predominantly take us to and from a work area. Okay, so from the site accommodation up into the building or whatever. But also remember, sometimes we need to get to a point of work. Sometimes that might be just a temporary thing, down into an excavation, maybe down to do connections and fittings and so on. So we do need to give some consideration as to how we safely get people to those areas. And as you can see in this case, using the temporary steps and the handrails to enable you to get safety there. So from what you've seen in those first pictures, the few other things we need to take into account. We are going to have spaces where people are crossing. We need signage, we need lighting, we need enough visibility that people can see each other, the drivers can see the pedestrians can see the vehicles, that they've got good visibility. Exactly the same when we're getting onto the public road. We all know what it's like with members of the public, that they're all onto themselves when it comes to paying attention. So you've got vehicles and people going out onto the public road. You've really got to treat them with kid gloves, and a bit of signage is not going to be enough. If you've ever been out for a walk, a cycle, pushing a pram along a footpath, you'll know that the nuisance sometimes people parking on the footpath or obstructions can cause us exactly the same within the confines of your sites. So, if you have walkways, it's a nice, clear, level area that somebody might be tempted, I'll just drop a pallet of stuff down in there, or I'll temporarily store something there for a while. Walkways are there for a reason. So again, you want to make sure that you don't allow them to become obstructed. Another photograph here just to show example. Again, big job, which has the site accommodation at the entry, but you'll see where the site door would open. They have the extra protection of the barrier, the vehicle barrier there, that stays down to enable people to walk across the walkway in front of the gates there. There's lots of signage, warning signage, speed limit signage, and indeed the little speed humps just at the area where the most traffic is going to and from the site office. Also have to recognize that sites change. Sites can change on a daily basis. Okay, so what was there in the morning mightn't be there in the afternoon, or vice versa. So we've got even excavations taking place in the photograph here. You know, with a piling rig. So we have areas that maybe temporarily become a no-go area for pedestrians. We need to give people a wide berth, and we know what people are like sometimes whenever they have to get somewhere in a hurry. Where you know they're thinking of something else, that they're walking a route that they've always walked, and suddenly they find that there's something in their way. So sometimes we physically need to prevent people. The signage is not going to be enough, and you know, using your temporary your temporary barriers, such as in the picture, very easy to move around as the plant machinery itself moves around. Don't have to get too much into electrical safety as part of this course. A couple of years ago, we had a project scenario that had high voltage cables running across the corner of the site, and we did have to incorporate that into a risk assessment and method statement. But again, we don't seem to have, there's no obvious sign of high voltage cables on our wedding venue project, but I'm sure some of you on the larger jobs have come across the concept of the goalpost before. You'll see it in the road building and external works like that, where you place barriers, whether they're concrete barrels or just using the excavated spoil to actually physically prevent vehicles from passing underneath the cables or storage underneath the cables, except in clearly designated areas. And the goalposts obviously designate the maximum height that a vehicle can be to safely pass under the high voltage cable. Now, I have some guidance that I will put on Moodle for you from both the HSA, particularly about construction plans, and also from HSE in Great Britain, which could be very useful if you did get a question around this, or indeed if you are just planning site traffic and traffic layouts on your site. So I'm not going to run through all of these because, as I say, all of the documentation is on Moodle for you. But to give you an example, this is a document that the HSE produces in Great Britain, and it gives you some examples of typical problems that you might face on a new build or a greenfield or a brownfield site. So, for example, what if you have contaminated land or muddy sites? What if there's restrictions on visibility or width? What if you've got temporary structures like gas storage areas or overhead power lines? What if you are having traffic that's near the edge of excavations or pits or somewhere? And it gives you suggested control measures that might be useful to deal with that. And there, for example, the last one about, if you're having to bring vehicles close to the edge of excavations, again, you'll know things like, concrete wheel stops, or even using timber box, which can physically prevent the vehicles. You're not leaving it entirely up to the judgment of the operator. There's more guidance on things like different areas of the site. So if you look there, you've got different areas like the entrance and exit, the parking areas, the offices and welfare facilities, your primary traffic routes, your secondary traffic routes, your storing areas, your loading and unloading areas, and actually areas you might need for some of your vehicles like wheel washes and things like that. So it splits the site down into different areas, and it gives you some guidance on what you should incorporate for vehicle routes and what you should incorporate for pedestrian routes. So it's a useful little document that could help you write effectively a traffic management plan. Now, one of the things that obviously comes to the fore when it comes to vehicles, I've already mentioned the unfortunate fatality in Belfast a number of years ago involving the telehandler reversing in the basement. Reversing or any sort of turning is always going to be an area that increases the risk. So when we're thinking of our site layouts, when we're thinking about our traffic management plans, we're always trying to avoid, or if we can avoid, to minimize reversing, because it's a major cause of fatal accidents. And we can do that a number of ways, like one-way systems and so on, or turning circles. And again, just to show you, there's a good little table that shows you the hierarchy of control as we talk about. In other words, what's our preference going to be to avoid reversing? Well, the preference has always been, can we not have reversing? Well, how could we not have reversing on site? Well, we could have a one-way system. So the vehicle comes in, it unloads, and it continues in the same direction to exit the site. Or indeed maybe around a turning circuit or something like that. But you're not going to have the room and the space to do that in every job. So then you go, right, what's the next best option? Can we reduce the number of vehicle movements? You know, not have deliveries coming in and out all the time, or scheduling them at different times. Educating the drivers that you know, not to reverse unless it's absolutely necessary. Then we get into our segregation. Then we get into our safe systems of work, things like having reversing cameras and beacons and reversing sirens and things like that, and good signage and high visibility. So that's kind of the mixture of controls that you need to try and reduce the risks from reversing. And again, there's another useful HSCGB document about, it's all part of the same leaflet that I'm putting up on Moodle for you, about typical problems on site when it comes to site traffic. You know, if there's a lack of separation. So let's be honest, I'm showing you lots of pictures of big sites here and lots of resources. Plenty of times you'll be on a small site and there's room to park the van, and that's just about it. And you've got deliveries coming in, and people are double parking, and you're double handling to get stuff off. So you're not always going to have that perfect world. So this gives you some examples like lack of pedestrian and vehicle separation, and what you should avoid, and what controls that you could put in place. Again, for reversing for smaller projects, what you can do. What if you've got restrictive visibility? What if you've got edges or steep gradients? What if there's obstructions? What can you do? And what about unintended vehicle movements? So, you know, people's competency, the maintenance of the vehicles. Don't leave keys in a vehicle that somebody can be tempted to use it who's not actually authorized to use it. So you're all in this course because you are construction managers, and a key point of a construction manager is to be the planner, is to be somebody who's planning what is happening. So good planning will look at trying to minimize vehicle movements around the site. Got to think about things like parking. You know, let's be honest. I suppose our advice to people, especially in the last 9 months, has been, you know, travel to site separately. You know, restrict the numbers of you that are traveling together, and all of these things. They're increasing the number of vehicle movements. So we have to be realistic about that. Can you provide some sort of parking space on the site? If not, where are you directing people to go to? Do you have control over the entryway? Yes, we've got a big site with a security person on the gate of the barrier. That's brilliant, but not every site's going to be able to afford that. So what are you doing there? What way have you for controlling who comes in and out of the site? And can you plan the layout? So example, so that the storage areas, now you've got a balance. You've got to, once the stuff's on site, you've still got to get it into the building. But you know, are you putting your storage areas in the optimum place, taking into account, yes, how far you have to transport them once they're on the site, but also, you know, that the delivery lorries have the minimum distance to travel. We can have all the best systems in the world, and signage up and paperwork completed and so on, but there's a large element of this is also about people as well. Okay, so if we think of the operators, that you've got the right operators, and I'm sure you've all come across people. I mean, the starting point is you've got the right certification, you've got the right ticket, you've got the right card to operate the machine, but you'll also, I'm sure, come across people who have the right ticket, card, and they've been absolute disasters operating the machinery. So just because somebody, you know, look out your window and see everybody driving past, every one of those people should have a license. It doesn't mean there's not some idiots out there. So, you know, the number one starting point is, do they have the right certification? But then keeping an eye on people, do they look like they're competent? Do they look like they're safe to operate it? So it's the right sort of training that we give to people. Also keeping an eye on people that are new to the site or that we're not familiar with, or, you know, you're subcontracting, you're hiring things in all the time. So you're trying to keep an eye on that. And, you know, we also know that people are giving guidance, and there's you know, authorized signals and training that you need to be able to understand and give those signals. And it's not just, you know, thumbs up and back a bit or forward a bit, that people stick to doing it the proper way. So there's an education element, and again, this is where it comes back to some extent with your inductions and just how much you cover off with them whenever you first get them onto the site. Goes without saying with regards to visibility. I mean, the clue is in the name of our clothing: high visibility. Okay, and you know it is nowhere as important that people wear the right high vis gear than when it comes to traffic. It's to give, particularly this time of year, you know, we think about how dark it gets and some of the murky days that we have, and you know, just how easy it is. We're best people in the world can be guilty of a slip for a second. Somebody takes a shortcut on a route that they're meant to take. Somebody is reversing a vehicle or driving a vehicle and just for a split second isn't paying attention. The more that we can do to prevent that from happening, the more that we can do that people would see that before it becomes an issue. So the high-vis clothing, good lighting around your site, properly trained, competent drivers and signalers and marshals, and the machinery having the latest best equipment in terms of the right mirrors for reversing CCTV cameras, reversing alarms, and so on. And again, I've already touched on signs and instructions. Okay, so you don't want to overload people with signs everywhere, but we all understand basic road signs. We all understand warning signs. We all understand speed limits and things like that. So, you know, you use very similar signs to the type that you'd be used to seeing on the highways. And, you know, you've got to get the balance right between there's some very funny photographs out there of sites, you know, the big notice boards up and trying to get far too much information across. People will just not read it. There's a balance of what information that people will take in. There's a good document. Sure, some of you never used it, but I've given you a link to it there, and I'll put a copy of it in Moodle. But it's an HSA construction site traffic management plan guidance. If you were to get a question like we've had before, basically asking you to do a site traffic management plan for the wedding venue project, that is your Bible effectively for that. That will give you all the guidance you need and a template of how to do it. Some of you might have your own traffic management plan templates. That's fine to use as well if your own companies have it. But that out of everything we're talking about this morning, if there was one strong possibility of a question, it would be to ask you to do a traffic management plan for the wedding venue project. And you know what? If you do get a question like that, it actually can be quite good, because your 2,000 words isn't as important as that, because you're producing a document that will include, you know, site layouts. So these aren't relevant to any of the projects you're doing at the minute, but you know, there's a housing project, for example, a phased housing project, and it's showing you know, delivery routes and things like that, and where plant machinery is going to be occupied, and so on. A couple of years ago, as I said to you, we had a city centre job which created additional project problems, and there you see you have your, you know, your one-way system and so on, and you're working out where all of your accommodation is going to be, your short-term parking, your deliveries, and your wheel wash, and so on. If we'd had a city centre job this time, I'd have been flagging this up as a much more probable question, but it's a reasonable one if you get it, because, as I say, it's not 2,000 words of text. It's a drawing plus a bit of text to explain how you put the drawing together. Okay, so that's site layouts. Talk for a minute about health and safety management systems. Okay, so you already know from what we've done on the course and on your previous health and safety knowledge, there's lots of legislation and guidance that we're meant to adhere to, that we're meant to follow in managing a construction project. And sometimes you kind of sit and think, well, how do I know if I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing? Or clients will sit there and go, how do we know that this company's as good as they should be and that they're doing everything they're supposed to be? So something that has been around for a number of years are health and safety management systems. Now, management systems themselves exist for lots of things. There's quality management systems, there's environmental management systems, and of course there's health and safety management systems. The main one, we used to call it OSAS 18001. It's now called ISO 45001. Some of you probably are familiar maybe with Safety Cert, which is another one we have, particularly in Ireland. In the UK, they have CHAS, which is another one. They're all just different types of health and safety management systems. And what basically health and safety management systems are, somebody comes in and looks at your company and carries out an audit, usually be an external person, and effectively what they're saying is they're giving you hopefully a clean bill of health to say that the system that your company has in place is robust enough that it meets all of the required standards to meet all health and safety legislation. You're doing things in the right way. Now, it's only a snapshot because we all know, you know, when auditors come in, you get everything all lined up and everything looking good for the day because the auditor's there. But it provides a degree of comfort that somebody independent has come and take a look at how you do things, and effectively says that you're doing it in the right way. Now, all management systems follow, there was a management thinker called Deming. So Deming's cycle, which is plan, do, check, and act. And this actually is a useful bit of advice for any management activity. Anything you do, those are the 4 stages of it. You plan, you do, you check, and you act. Okay, so before you are about to start a project, you know, you put your plans in place. You've got all sorts of plans, but we're concentrating on health and safety. So you put your health and safety plan in place, right? And let's be honest, it's a bit of a guess. You're trying to plan for something that hasn't happened yet, but you have something in place. Then you go out and do it. You start the job. And very quickly after you've started the job, you do checks. Now, whether they're site inspections or audits or whatever, you've got to find out, is your plan working? And let's be honest, rarely does a plan work 100%. So you check to see, well, what parts of my plan are working and what aren't working. And the important thing is that the bits that aren't working, you take action to improve it. And then that cycle constantly repeats. So that's where we get this plan, do, check, act. And again, if you're talking about management systems or quality systems or anything, you know, those are the sorts of little diagrams that are very, very useful to throw into the coursework to actually explain what you're talking about. Now, management systems, health and safety management systems, should I say, a lot better reputation now than a number of years ago. You know, people still can come in, and it's possible. I've seen some pretty horrific examples of this over the years, where, you know, people basically cheat the system. They get everything lined up for one day and one day only, and as soon as the auditor's gone, they just revert back to the way they used to do things. People do things a lot better now. But there is no doubt that a part of meeting the requirements of a management system is proving that you're doing all those things, and that means paperwork. That means documentation. Okay, so all I'll say to you, this is something, a little sort of, if you like, health check for your own organizations. Don't just do paperwork for the sake of doing paperwork. I don't want to turn you all. I don't want you to go off and annoying your health and safety managers and so on, but always ask the question, why are we doing this? Do we need to be doing this? A lot of the time, yes, you do, and there's a reason for it. But we keep health and safety documentation as simple as possible, because the simpler it is, the more people are likely to do it, the more people are likely to follow it. So don't just fill in forms for the sake of filling in forms, okay? Don't rely on the fact of, you know, is that job safe? Well, yeah, we filled in all the forms before we started it. Filling in all the forms before you started doesn't make it safe. Doing the job safely makes it safe. The paperwork is to prompt you to ask all of the right questions. So sometimes people get a little bit too caught up on the fact that we filled in the form for that, so we can go ahead and do that. The form is only part of it. Also, there has to be good buy-in to health and safety management systems. People have to you know, all buy into it from the top to the bottom. And again, in your roles, folks, as construction managers, you're a big part in that. You might have health and safety advisors, health and safety officers that help with parts of this, but it needs your buy-in too, and you need to practice what you preach. And that's a big way of them. You'll hear people talk about, you know, the safety culture in an organization, and that only comes whenever people buy in from top to bottom. So that's a little bit about management systems. As I say, I'm sure you have some degree of knowledge on them from your own organizations. But the next time somebody's talking about an audit or something like that happening, just ask a few more questions to find out what's involved with your health and safety management systems. So the final thing I want to touch on today is welfare facilities. Now, I have a number of slides and resources for you here that go into detail. Most of you will already know what you need on your sites, and we're pretty well versed in this. So I'm not going to go through every slide bullet point by bullet point. It's there as a resource for you should you get a question on this, or should you just want a little bit more information. But we all know that it's a fundamental right to have access to toilets and drinking water and changing areas and stuff, but obviously it's also a legal requirement as well. Lot of research done into this over the years, and a lot of very positive evidence that points to the fact that the better facilities you provide for the workforce, the more productive they are. People feel valued. People go in. I mean, I worked for many years in an old builder's office that was falling down around me. Usual builder, we build nice stuff for everybody else, but our own offices are practically falling down. I then went to work for a large consultancy in Belfast who'd just moved into this brand new purpose-built office, air conditioning, sofas in the lounge, potted plants everywhere, lovely canteen, breakout areas and all that. I have to say, for quite a period of time, that alone, I really enjoyed going to work in a different environment. It felt the pace. Last year, I was a judge on the Irish Construction Manager of the Year Awards, and one of the projects I visited was the big extension to the Apple campus down in Cork. And obviously I saw the job finished just to see what it was like. And I mean, that's a different extreme. They have breakout areas, nice leather chairs and sofas to relax on when they feel like it, looking out over waterfalls and sculptures, and they have pizza restaurants in the building, and it's incredible. But that's not just because they want to be trendy, right on employers. They know that the more people like working in a place, that they attract the better people, and people are more productive. It's not all about cracking the whip and starting at 7 and working to 6. It's productivity is done a whole lot of different ways. So the better we treat people, the more that we get out of them, and a big part of how we can do that is through the welfare facilities. So again, you've got to start at the beginning. You're starting a job. You're thinking about things like your site layouts and your traffic management plans, and you're also thinking, what welfare facilities will I need for a particular project? That is going to depend on, obviously, again, the size of the project, but other things like, what type of work am I going to be doing? Is there going to be maybe a lot of work with sewers that are very dirty, or demolition work producing a lot of dust? I might need additional facilities then, like shower units and things like that. I need to look at the size of the project. I visited a job in Scotland last year from an old candidate of mine that he was the project manager on. It was a big waste to energy plant, huge big site. And they had welfare facilities dotted all over the project, just to minimise the distance that people had to go to use the loo, to get a drink of water, to get a cup of tea, or whatever. So you've got to weigh all of these things up. How many people will be using it? And remember, jobs fluctuate. There'll be times when there's more people working in the jobs than others. Once you provide the facilities, they have to be kept clean and tidy and properly maintained. And sometimes in jobs as well, you have to move them around. You might have different phases, which will mean you'll have to uplift them and move them to a different part of the project. So these are all things that you need to have to think about at the planning phase. I'm not going to go through the individual bullet point for each of these slides, but if you don't know these, at least you'll know where to go and find them. There are rules, the guidelines about how many toilets you should have for every person in work, and the bigger the site gets, what the ratio has to be, and about keeping them clean and tidy, and the rules about male and female as well. That would lead us on to the washing facilities, and again there's guidelines about that and what you have to provide, and obviously not just cold water, but warm and hot water to enable people, especially at the minute, last 9 months we've been on everybody to wash their hands thoroughly and so on. We have to provide the facilities to allow people to be able to do that. And again, there's the numbers there. These are not the sort of things that we need to labour, and you don't really need to probably get into this as part of any assignment answer. But it is important as the person in charge of a project that you know exactly what should be provided. The washing facilities, again, a little bit of detail on that, and talks about the difference of male and female and so on, and shower rooms if you have them, and so on, and how they should be sited, and the wash basins and so on. And then we have our drinking water as well, which ideally should be from the mains, but if not, you can use portable water, but you have to make sure that stays fresh, and so on as well. You have to provide changing areas, lockers, which will include not just somewhere, particularly bad weather conditions, we're asking people to maybe need a change of clothes, to have PPE and so on. Well, they need somewhere to store that. They need somewhere to take shelter if the weather conditions don't allow them to carry on with their work. And again, that leads us into things like drying facilities and so on as well. They need to have somewhere. I know a lot of lads like to sit in the van and so on, but we still have to provide space for them to be able to take their breaks and heat up food and make cups of tea and coffee and so on. And canteens should not double as storerooms. It's either a canteen or a store, and it shouldn't be a little bit of both. I know it's easy for me to sit here and say that. You folks have got space problems and stuff like that, so that's not my problem effectively in sight, but that's what the rules say. So as much as possible, you need to have, separate a storeroom from your canteen facility. And of course, we can't ignore the fact that some people are working, maybe going out, working in different locations, maybe going out, putting in cabling, utilities, road laying contracts and stuff there. So just to be aware that, we don't necessarily have to provide fixed facilities for them, but we need to make arrangements for them. So whether that's somebody going out and doing maintenance in people's houses, somebody working in a shopping centre, somebody working in a hospital, and making arrangements to use the existing facilities, that will be fine. But we need to make those arrangements, and we need to make everybody aware of that. So, folks, that is today's health and safety, the penultimate one. Just one more to go. In the new year. I'll just take the slides down for a moment. So I'll take any questions in a second, but we have a 3-week break now until our next session, which is, if I remember right, the 6th of January, the first Wednesday in January. Obviously, take some time off. We all deserve it. But if you have any videos to catch up on, good time to do that. If you haven't the coursework done, good time to do that. I will not be checking emails every day, but I will be working some days. I'm probably working up to the 22nd, 23rd, and I usually do a day or two between Christmas and New Year. So if anybody has any questions or struggling with anything, drop me an email. Don't mind a quick phone call over the holidays, especially if it produces a bit of coursework. If you have already got me coursework in, I will be looking at it over the holidays and the first week in January. If you have coursework into me, it will automatically trigger me to contact you to arrange a one-to-one, which is as short or as long as you like at a time to suit you, where I will just go over your coursework and give you a bit of constructive feedback. If you haven't submitted coursework, I don't routinely schedule a one-to-one, but I'm quite happy to, but you need to initiate that. So be honest with yourself. If it's January and you are struggling, or you haven't been able to get the coursework in and you just want to chat to go through a few things, just drop me an email and I'm more than happy to do that. Reason I'm saying that as well is the fact that after I have you on the 6th of January, then you have 6 or 7 sessions with Paul Andrews, my colleague who'll take you through construction technology. So it's late February, maybe early March before I see you again after that. So opportunity early January to have a chat with me if there's anything that you want to go through. You hopefully are aware from the email I sent out, CIOB, typical IT issue, did an upgrade to Moodle and it reset the size limits for uploading videos, which means our normal 1-hour videos all of a sudden are too large to upload. The ones that are already there are there and stay there. They fixed it for me last week, and then 24 hours later it reset again to the lower size, and they are looking at it and they've promised me it'll be fixed within the next day or two. So Hence, until that's fixed, the videos will not be in Moodle. I am happy to put them on YouTube and send you the link to there, just as a one-off, especially if anybody's, obviously there's only 7 of you here at the minute. There's 11 in the group, so there's always a few watching it in the recording. So I'll keep those on YouTube until I'm 100% sure the Moodle problem is fixed. The presentation and any supporting documentation, however, will be on Moodle. Well, straight away. I'll do that before I head off for my lunch here. So that's us for 3 weeks. But as I say, I am contactable over the holidays. Has anybody got any questions or comments, anything they'd like to ask just while we're on here? And if you have, don't forget to unmute yourself. All good?
All good.
Okay then. Well, guys, have a great Christmas and Happy New Year and all that sort of stuff. If I'm not talking to you before over the holidays, have a great time, and I shall see you all again on the 6th of January.
Thanks, Happy Christmas.
Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers.